All right. I'm so honored to have on the program today, Amy Demas. Amy, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's a great honor.
A lot of our members met you out in Las Vegas at the TC boot camp, but not enough. So I said, if you please come back on Ask the Experts, I want to talk about Communicate Excellence, your company, talk about your background. So tell us a little bit about who you are and how you got to where you are today.
Oh, thank you. So I have Communicate Excellence as my business, and it's been a little bit of a winding road as to how I got here. But when you look back, you can see how everything leads up to it. So let me start with how Communicate Excellence began, and I'll backtrack the journey there. I started this business in 2019, and I want to work with those front desk team members as well as treatment coordinators on their communication skills, making sure that we give a great experience to our patients. Knowing especially that our scheduling coordinators a lot of times are told, here's how to put the call on hold, here's how to take it off hold, and here's a sheet to take a call. Good luck with that.
Here's a sheet.
Right?
Yeah.
And many times we're left to our own devices. So I wanted to make sure that we had ways of repeatable habits to begin that. But how I came to have this business is before that, I was in my husband's office doing each of those admin roles. So I am working from experience and that thought of, would I actually say that or not? Because a lot of things can look good on paper in a script, but if they're not realistic, that's not going to happen.
That's true.
My husband and I, we just had our 10-year anniversary and just this past week. So it means I had a life before orthodontics, and that was working at Bank of America as a product developer. So having to know how to sit between techie geeks who are writing program and salespeople who will sell anything, and how to get those talking and what limitations are. And then my little step before that, I was a homeschooling mom back when it was actually homeschooling. I homeschooled for a number of years. And then my prior step before that is I worked as a mechanical engineer for a consulting firm designing petrochemical piping runs as a consultant there. So basically think braces on a huge scale. Stops, all those things. You want the expansion going in certain areas. So it's all been a winding trail, but it all leads to, I love being a teacher.
When I saw some of your systems, particularly if we have time to dive into straight through processing, which I think you're the only person in healthcare talking about that, I was like, is she an engineer? Yes, she is. Some of the coolest people I met, and a lot of our members are in orthodontics. It's not surprising, come through the engineering world. Which is cool. So I actually have a meeting next week with the dean of the School of Computer Engineering, because we think there's some pretty neat stuff and a different tangent in orthodontics we could be doing in the computer science department with AI. So any hoodles, let's get back on track. I love this concept. It kind of jarred me out of my just normal path. You say there's a big difference between onboarding only versus actually training team members. And I now, after hearing that from you, wholeheartedly agree. But most doctors do it the other way around, don't they?
Right. The onboarding is orienting a team member to where are the lockers, what uniforms do I wear on what day, which office do I show up to. That's onboarding to orient you and maybe even give you exposure to your culture. Training is advanced skill training. And here's what many doctors tend to do is, well, I'm going to wait and see if they last. Well, where is that sweet spot of, yes, orient them to see if they're going to be a fit, but then get the training going, as opposed to seeing if they survive long enough and then maybe get training and then you're having the turnover because they're floundering. So there is a difference between simply onboarding and training, and then ongoing training that needs to happen.
Yeah, and there's a thing about like what we got in dental school on, like, the management of human capital and emotional intelligence and training other people is almost zero. So where do you start? Someone comes to you and says, listen, I really need help on the phones. They're either inconsistent. I guess maybe let's start there. What are some core frustrations a doctor shows up at your door with that you can help them?
One of the things that we have to realize is In today's society, we have a generation of individuals who've only grown up with this.
Good
They did
point.
not
Good point.
they did not grow up with, remember on the kitchen wall, you had that
Yeah.
phone on the kitchen wall with the long cord
Why is there a cord?
twisted
Why are there
around?
buttons?
Right, well, you were really advanced if you had the buttons and you didn't have to have the rotary
Yeah.
component on there. But don't you remember when we grew up, your parents told you when that phone rings, you will say, "Cromwell residence, this is Amy. How may I help you?"
Exactly.
So you had this inherent underlying training that sometimes you answer the phone and it's different because it could be anybody compared to you're calling up your girlfriend, your boyfriend, or otherwise.
Yep.
So they're both talking, but you talk in different ways. So we now have a generation that did not have that subtle training. And they rather text and email than get on a phone call. So they're not established. They haven't been empowered in that way. And so they are simply using the skills, and they've got a lot of experience, but not a lot of expertise in there.
Yep.
And I remember there's a difference between experience and expertise. Have you ever heard of the BMW driving school?
Yes. 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 Yes.
So I took my kids to that when they were 16. That was the thing I did in South Carolina with them.
Smart.
Yeah, and they say, they train a lot of police officers how to drive because they already have a lot of experience, but not expertise.
Expertise.
There's a difference. And so the coaching that I provide is trying to bring expertise to the unique scenario of what the office needs.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, I mean, there are more and more, back to the texting generation, more and more patients who will interact in the new patient portal either via message or text, but still an overwhelming majority pick up the phone and call a doctor's office. Are your data still showing that?
That is true, or it's going to lead to that. It may begin with a text. It may begin with a lead generation on Facebook or website, but it eventually translates into a phone call at some point.
Yeah, I use we're heading out to the San Juan Islands this summer to do some outdoor excursion with some friends. And so that's me pretending like I know what I'm doing outdoors. And so I said, we need to get like from Seattle up to Anacortes and on a ferry. And so I was using the little messenger app on Four Seasons to do this. And at a certain point, she said, got it. She's like, okay, now just need to confirm a few things. Like, I need to give you a phone call. Right? Like, at a certain point, it would take, I don't know, like 10 years to get that conversation done via messaging. And whereas sometimes just a simple phone call of like, how many bags? What types of bags? Are they suitcases? Are they small bags? Like, you do need to get on the phone. So I love that. So I'm on a different, I'll go on any tangent you let me go on. How was that driving school with your kids?
Oh, it was fascinating. One of the favorite parts I loved seeing is when they put them on the sliding circle, they get it wet and they start spinning them out. So they get the kids in the car, and then the driver pulls, the school driver pulls the brake and spins them out. And watching those kids the first time, it's like, whoa, the second time, it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And it takes 3 and 4 and 5 times. And then all of a sudden they get that sensation. They're like, oh, turn into the spin. Where do you want to go?
Yep.
And that's the same way with coaching. Just because you see it happen, you watch a professional driver do the skid and not get taken out, you have to do it yourself, and you have to get the feedback loop on it.
What's your mix like of members you work with, docs? Are they bringing new employees to you? Are they bringing existing employees to you? What sort of level is it? Team leaders and everything in between? What's it look like on your day-to-day helping docs fix their communication?
So I generally have those on the phone because that's where my bread and butter is. I will get treatment coordinators. I will get doctors, but the bread and butter is there because I'm so unique in how I handle that. Right. There are many others who are handling some of those other spaces. So that's not generally what I get. What is the tipping factor? And it's usually one of my initial questions to the doctor or the office manager. What was the factor that led you to reach out now? And a lot of times it's a new team member, or maybe there's been an existing team member that is really starting to get frustrated patients talking to the office manager. So it tends to be something is kind of hit that breaking point, the straw that broke the camel's back. And the neat thing is, though, once I tend to work with a team, they realize when I get a new team member, I become part of that onboarding process. It's like, hey, we've established this. Let's make sure we continue it on with the next team member that comes
It's such
on.
a smart service because very few of our clients are big enough to have their own onboarding specialist, but
Mm-hmm.
everyone needs it in pieces, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so it's just so smart. We were talking with a member, at a certain level, you do need a full-time marketing person, but most orthodontists don't, right? And you don't need, if you've got 10 employees or 20 employees, you don't need a full-time onboarding specialist, but you do need one at key junctures. How long can you walk us through? Are you on site? Are you virtual? What's that look like?
I start with a 3-phase approach. The first phase is a training phase, and that is appropriate for your entire team. And I do that on site. It's a 6-hour training day, and we're really learning how important communication is to that customer experience. And that's why it's relevant to everybody. After that point, we go into coaching. So that coaching is also in 2 phases, just like your treatment's in 2 phases. You have the active phase and the retention phase.
Yep.
The great thing about that active phase is you are going to see, hear, and notice the difference within 3 months. And so I'm getting one-on-one Zoom times with each of those individuals. And I listen to about an hour's worth of phone calls for each person, each coaching session.
Wow.
It's a lot. And then the retention, we spread out the amount of time to make sure we're sustained. But it's a key part in this feedback loop because then I can play these little clips of what we're focusing on and they can hear it one after the other after the other. And we are validating trends. We're saying, hey, we can celebrate this. And now you have the business principle behind it to encourage you to keep going. Or this has got some parts of it. Let's enhance it. Or this is absent. Now let's close the gap. And it helps them to isolate the key components without having to listen to the entire phone call all over again.
That's
And so
huge.
that's where we get that cooperation going.
That's huge. Yeah, we spoke in Vegas, and you told me how many hours of phone calls you've listened to, and I almost hit the floor. It was some staggering number. How many hours a year are you
I
listening?
listen to over 15,000 phone calls each year. And believe me, you don't want to have to do that. But if you
But
did,
that makes you the world's expert. And so my next question is, what have you learned? What trends have you seen maybe coming out of the pandemic? Any big takeaways and all those calls?
people,
I'm guessing mostly orthodontists, some dentists. Is it a good mix or other healthcare
it
practices?
is. I've actually done a driving school because I had an orthodontist who had a med spa and a car dealership with a driving school. And
Whoa.
so I've actually worked across a few different industries,
Cool.
but
Cool.
primarily in the dental field, but it
Yep.
applies anywhere. Here's the thing. When I began, I was like, what am I listening for? I don't know. I simply was going in and doing speech evaluation. So I'm a Toastmaster and I've won awards on speech evaluation. So I was using those skills. But then I took that Six Sigma certification that I have and say, okay, what's my 80/20 on there? And I found the consistencies across there, and it is across the board. So how do we open and close those calls politely, or open and close holds
Yep.
on there? So how do we envelop a conversation well? And the key thing is it's common courtesy.
Yeah.
And the thing is, common courtesy is a little uncommon. So to our advantage, simply bringing back common courtesy does a lot.
Yep.
And then we work on how do we schedule appointments or how do we guide well. So we've gone from polite to guiding. That is one thing that a lot of times our people on the front desk are like, when do you want to come in? And they go into that wishing mode and they get into a negotiation mode and it doesn't work. It's
Yep.
one of the biggest things that when people change this over, my scheduling coordinators say, oh, my calls are shorter. And you know, when calls are shorter, they're ready for the next person. All right. Then we move into that new patient call, making sure we make it a conversation instead of an interrogation.
Good
And
point.
then my last lesson is how do we handle upset callers? So if
Cool.
I hit all those 5 lessons, there may be nuances for an individual, but we're going to run the gamut on the big hitters that we have.
What's your average timeline to get someone through that training? How long does that take?
Those 5 lessons,
Yep.
3 months.
Cool.
We
Very,
meet
very
every
cool.
2 weeks. Every 2 weeks. It's enough to get them enough practice to see momentum, but not lose the momentum either. So 3 months, you're going to have it in. And then the other 6 months of the retention are 2 times we're checking in maintenance level. So you get your win up front.
Do you have offices that at the end of that 9 months, like, okay, we got some new people, bring you back in the office and kind of start over?
So I never make them have to go back to starting over. They simply buy their coaching. And that's, with my husband being an orthodontist, I realize the way a lot of them think is,
Yeah.
oh, I don't have to wait till I get to a critical mass to do this over. All I want you to do is, like their onboarding, buy their coaching.
Cool.
Only buy their coaching. Now, I've had some that either because of COVID, they've had enough turnover. Could you come in and reinvigorate our entire team?
Yeah.
So it's always possible to do that.
What do you do with docs who have a script that they think is perfect, or they've got some way that they think is working? And do you try to work around those existing telephone scripts? Do you have, or they say, hey, we're open to change it all? What's your preference?
I would prefer them to make intentional decisions.
Yep.
So I am not going to come in and say, thou shalt must always use only my form. That's not going to gain cooperation. But I want to open your mind to what it can sound like typically with forms or scripts that are like this.
Yep.
And then you make the intentional decision. If you intentionally decide, we will do it this way, I'm not going to arm wrestle you.
Yep.
We're going to do the best we can with what we've got.
Let's talk about scripts. I've received this because we have scripts. People want to see our scripts, and everyone that's the one. Give me Amy's script. There's I think a misconception that scripts are limiting, that they put you in a box and they make you say certain things and they sound robotic. Well, I guess if you do it the wrong way, it could be. But can you talk about how we've always thought scripts are pretty freeing because you don't have to think think about which topic you're going to approach next. And I'll go back to the Four Seasons example. I know I can almost feel the cadence of their scripting, and it still feels really nice because they've hired people like you to come in and fix how they talk to people. What are your thoughts on scripts?
I think there are 2 components to it. You've got scripting and you've got structure. And I think blending the 2 is great. So the script is the part that we greet the phone the very same way every time. We respond the same way every same time. The structure, such as in a new patient call, is we have a way that we would direct the call, but we've got to be flexible with the person. So that way, say they go and jump to the insurance question first, which normally in the structure is the 4th out of 5 things. I'm going to go there, but then I'm going to guide it back in here. So what I don't want people to sound like is a robot on there, but I want to give you some freedom. So just like a house you build with walls and a ceiling, though that's the structure, and that allows you to do your decorating style. So there's where the structure gives you some freedom and flexibility in there and still be a person. So I want us to make sure that we have a branded message without losing the individual personality in the midst of it.
I love that. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I just think some people, well, if you give them scripts, they're going to sound like a robot. I think you've shown with the data that that's not true. But I love that house analogy. That's great. Might borrow that. I'll give you credit for it. That's really good. It's really, really good. Any big thumb rules on how long a new patient call should take? Do you?
Good question. Depending on how many questions you ask, you may be 3 to 5, 4 to 6, 5 to 7 minutes. So, once you start getting up and you're bumping toward that 8-minute mark, you're wearing them out. Yep. You simply are wearing out. I would like you to really sit back and think, do I need to ask this question now? Versus, can I find it out later? Always going back to this first phone call is like a first date. And, are you going to ask everything on the first date? Are you going to come to the first date and go, all right, I just have about 50 questions for you? because there's not going to be a second date.
We want to ask all the questions, though, Amy. We want, when dentists, we're very detail oriented. We need all the answers now. What's your insurance number? What's your husband's insurance number? What's all of those things? Okay, so that's really cool, because I've always said if you've been on there for more than 10 minutes, something's gone wrong.
Absolutely. And here's the other thing, structure wise, that most of us get wrong, either because we're stuck on the computer screen, or we've taken that computer screen and replicated it on a sheet of paper.
Yep.
We tend to be in an assembly line mode. We ask all the questions first. Then, and only then, if they behave well, we'll give you the appointment you asked for. Holding them hostage. And, so think about a first date. Would you sit there and go and say, well, what about this in your bank account? What about this? All those insurance questions, like what's your social security number? What's all this? What's all this? And you're like, I haven't even gotten the appointment I asked for.
It's a great point. So do you push the appointment further to the front then?
I do. Yep. I actually call it a balanced welcome call. Cool. And I put the appointment in the middle, like the fulcrum point on a seesaw.
Smart.
So I ask a few introductory questions, basic information that allows me to schedule intelligently. Now they've gotten what they wanted. Now it's almost like the tide turns and we're getting ready for our second date. Now let's get ready. Yep. Oh, I'd love to send you the appointment details via email. What is your email? Now it's like, that makes sense. Oh, in order for us to have all the information ready, do you have any insurance you would like us to verify? See, now we're together finishing those up and simply moving the appointment forward. They've gotten what they wanted, and then we can get ready.
Huge. Yep. Mm-hmm. Huge. Well worth everyone's time on this webinar. That's so smart. Let's talk about straight through processing, because you were the first person that I've heard talk about it in dentistry, and I love it. And I think it'll open a lot of listener viewers' eyes and ears. So what is straight through processing? Why should we pay attention to it? How can we use it in healthcare?
One of the things about this is a metric. Straight through processing is used in other industries. And as I put in that writing, I got exposed to it when I was at Bank of America. Think of straight through processing as the happy path. It's the fastest way from beginning to money or beginning to end. So in the orthodontic world, we go from call to visit to they're ready for treatment, then they start treatment. That's the fastest way. The shocking thing is when you look at numbers, there's only about 36% straight through starts. And that can be shocking to us. The micrometrics that are underneath here. It's just that when you bring it all the way up to a macro metric, it makes a big difference. So quickly walking through, we've got our hurdle points. From a call, will they actually show up for their new patient exam without rescheduling? And for many industries, for many of us, it can be 15, 20% are no showing, missing, and it could be even higher with rescheduling. But that gets masked because we tend to look at our overall missed appointment rate. And when you consider out of 100 appointments a day, maybe there's only 10 new patients. And so it's getting watered down. So you need to isolate your new patient no-show rate on there. Well, then they come in. Oh, and I wanted to also say that number is actually increasing because gone are the days where people only called you and reached out to you when their dentist said to come in. Nowadays, they're coming in through Facebook leads and curiosity seekers instead of treatment seekers. So that number's going higher. Then we move into, are they ready for treatment? Which means, are they going to go observation or growth and guidance, or are they ready to be presented a treatment recommendation? That number can be, when I first started working with my husband, that number was 20, 25%, and it's now getting 35 to 40%. 40, yeah. And you've got to think about, well, what are we emphasizing these days? Ages 7 and up, come in for a first visit, which has value, but they drop out of the straight through processing flow. You've got to have a supporting thing, and they are your savings account. It's great, but they're not straight through. Now we say, hey, here's a treatment recommendation. Are you going to start? And then there is our traditional conversion rate. And what you need to do is you're looking at the percent that continue to go through, multiply those 3%, and you get your straight through processing rate. The thing is, if we can have a better phone call or a better first impression and have more come in, we can't impact whether they're ready. And then if we have a better relationship so that when we offer treatment, they start, small changes in those percents really have a big impact on the straight through starting, the straight through processing.
Yeah, we've always said if you have a conversion problem, you really have a customer service problem. You've got a
Mhm.
sales problem. You've got a person at the front desk who is probably overwhelmed. No one goes to work and says, "Oh, I want to do a really bad job today." But if the front
Right.
desk isn't, the reception and phones aren't, getting results, they're usually overwhelmed. A lot of
Mhm.
docs we turn on call tracking, we start listening to the phone calls like you do, and we're like, "Whoa, this person answered like 100 phone calls today. Like, how is she standing upright?" It's unbelievable. She's just exhausted under the table. Do you have advice for someone who, is there a good number of phone calls per phone coordinator
Ooh.
before they get overwhelmed? Do you guys, or how many, I guess, how many phones team do you typically work with in most office, or any
So I,
suggestions there?
I have scheduling coordinators. Sometimes there's one, sometimes there's up to four answering the phone at a time. I think you get a better indicator when you start seeing how many calls are going on hold.
Yeah, good point.
You know, and so if you are not going in listening to every single phone call, start noticing how many calls are going 10 minutes or longer. That's if it's over 10 minutes, you've probably had a hold in there. I've had some offices that once I raised their awareness to it, all of a sudden they routed phone calls differently and a lot of times it was a person calling in asking about a repair question and they were putting them on hold to ask someone clinically. And so they changed their process around it and their calls that were 10 minutes and longer went down by 64%.
Whoa, whoa.
So
Huge.
imagine what that does. Yeah, I had another office that they had so many calls going on hold, and it was because they didn't know how to guide to schedule. And they were always, let me ask my manager.
Let
Let me
me
ask my
ask.
manager.
Yeah,
And so they were always doing that. And now they schedule with confidence. And it's rare that I hear a call on hold.
nice.
So it makes a huge difference on
Yeah,
that.
the on-holding, that's a huge pearl for everyone listening. They used to Market Hardware used to email me any call that was over. I think we landed at 7 minutes, so we're right where you were. About 8 minutes, things start to something's going on. Maybe it's untrained, maybe it's on hold or on hold several times. They get
Hmm.
started on hold, so they're just bouncing phones. And so they would email me all of those. Like Saturday morning, I get an email and have all those calls attached. And we wanted to see zero or a few of them, but also I wanted to listen to them because sometimes it was a parent that had questions we just weren't prepared for from a surgical or cleft lip and palate standpoint or some weird insurance thing we'd never heard of. And so we had to go back and retrain the teams. But I like the on hold metric is huge. Do you have any advice for doctors who want to expand hours of answer? Do you get into that world with docs on like, hey, you're not even answering your phones on Friday, like they're all going, you got 38 messages on Monday morning. Like, do you have any advice for when people are calling?
I of course we would love to see more coverage, but a lot of times because I'm getting into everybody's different phone systems, I don't always have those metrics to say, "Hey, are you aware of that?" And that is one of our weaknesses that we haven't connected up. I mean, think about how many of our offices now have new insights because they're connected to Gauge or one of those places where we can see more things globally. There's so many things on this lead or phone to where they actually become a patient and get into those metrics that we're limited by. We are limited by.
Do you have a preference on answering live versus putting someone through a phone tree? Push 1 for new patients, push 2 for, do you have a
Oh,
preference on that?
interesting. How interesting on the timing of that because yes, it would be lovely if every call was answered by person up front. I actually had somebody ask this because they called my husband's office, and we are after post COVID are in a much smaller team, and so we had to take into consideration the size of our team and the pressure we were putting. So we actually now have a offsite answering the new patient calls because we're not going to give them a good experience otherwise. Is that ideal? No, it's not what I would always love to have, but it's the best in light of where we are. So I think you need to take it on a case by case basis on here because and for those who want to do an in house off the front desk answering, you still have to wonder, are they getting put on hold to wait for that new patient coordinator? So those are some of the things when you listen to calls the whole times, and otherwise you're going to get some indications of, is that really working for you or not?
Yeah, I guess let the results, guide you. And so we took that advice early in my career that we had to have a phones coordinator for new patients, and
Mhm.
that person had a special type of her was bright green pads so everyone knew she was taking a new patient phone call. And I like your point of like we've just taken the computer screen and printed it out. Like we just put it straight in the computer. So I still have members like, let me show you my phone sheet. And I'm like, ah.
I know it,
So
and it looks like a computer screen
yeah.
replicated. There's actually
So
no
yeah.
guidance on there.
We noted that there were many, many times where there was more than one new patient waiting for that person who was trained and
Mhm.
had the experience in answering those calls. So we pretty quickly ditched that model. I was like, we can't leave these new patients waiting on hold.
Right.
What's a good metric, I guess, for I mean, how many calls do you see going to on hold when you start a new client? Is that I know that one client you dropped them by 64%. That's pretty dramatic.
Yeah.
So they should pay your fee gladly, right? For hints more. Yeah.
Again, I'm gonna have to go back to, it depends on the phone system metrics, what we can pull from it. Other than that, when I'm pulling longer calls, I'm taking note, how many times am I do I have a long call because it's hold and there's really no content value to it? And so I would raise my hand to that doctor and say, we've got something going on here. Is it, like you said, the lack of training? Is it the lack of number of individuals answering the phone? So you have to take that on a case by case basis. I do not have global enough metrics on that or consistency across phone systems to be able to answer that.
Good point. Yeah, we should find a good phone vendor. We had
Yeah.
all of them. A lot of the IP based phone systems, you really got to push your provider to give you good data, and then
Oh,
call tracking software is not 100% accurate.
hmm,
And if you're using a third party answering service, that's not 100% accurate. So
hmm.
the good news, like you said, common courtesy is not so common. The good news on this front is that most of your competitors have no clue what's going on their phones. We know
Right.
because we show up and I'm like, did you know you're missing 40% of your phone calls? It's like, well, we can grow. People are like, how can you guarantee you'll grow doctors' offices 25% in a year? It's like, we're just going to listen to their phones and we're going to
Oh,
fix it
yeah.
there. So,
If you
um,
heard if you heard what you've heard and heard what I've heard, it would be a slam dunk on, oh my goodness, you need to provide this type of training.
yeah. Any advice on hiring a new phones coordinator? Any
Mm.
personality traits, questions to ask? Do you ever get engaged in people telling you, let's see what Amy thinks? Should we, they would probably send all of their new prospective hires to you to vet them out. Any advice there?
Oh, well, I appreciate that. It's really neat when you have more than one person on the front desk to have that yin and yang component on it. It's fascinating when I've got someone who is, hmm, politeness is their easy trait, and they've got that bubbly personality, and then you've got that one who's more of a guider, and they are the ones who are making sure that we actually put the people into the system. And when you can train them both together, you're going to get that branded experience, but you still get those personality differences. So I think you can work with either one on here. Probably more to the middle is better, because if I get syrupy sweet and I can't ever get them to offer an appointment, that's ineffective. And if I got someone stern and you're just constantly reminding them, put a smile on your voice, you've got to have somewhere closer to the middle, a blend of that.
Smart. Yeah. We kind of started this with the, let's see if they survive. Like, just
Mhm.
like an old
Mm.
school military kind of experiment. Like, maybe we find someone who's a better fit, or give them the support they need and the expertise. Any big mistakes to avoid when implementing your system? Where did some doctors mess up and then have to put things back on the rails?
When they only say, well, I'm just going to train one person and then they'll just train everybody else.
Oh, that's huge. I'm so glad you let's say that again. Let's say because I've
When
seen
you
this. Like, we're gonna
right,
send one of our treatment coordinators to the TC boot camp, and we're not gonna send the associate doctor. I'm like, you might as well just not even come.
exactly, because when they take that one person, they're like, she's just going to teach everybody else. Well, okay, maybe they learned it, maybe they didn't. But are they a teacher? Are they a coach? Can they provide feedback? Oh, that's one of the biggest mistakes. Or not, like the new patient call is 40% of our coaching content. If you're not going to at least look at it and consider a change, my hands are tied behind my back. It makes it tricky.
I love that. My oldest son has golf tryouts today, and I don't
Mm.
think the coach is going to suggest that we just coach the captains and the captains teach everyone else, right? I think everyone's going to get coaching this year.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great. It's like pilots, we'll just train one pilot at United Airlines, and she can train all the other pilots. Really
Mhm.
amazing. That's great. That's great advice, because I'm laughing because it's so common where
Mhm.
it's like, let's just take our office managers to the event. It's like, bring the whole team. Anyone who can benefit from this knowledge needs to be here. And I decided long ago that it was some sort of training, some sort of a book,
Mhm.
some knowledge that I wanted. I wasn't going to let the cost get in the way of acquiring it. And it's worked out really well. I mean, there's so many other things that I can do without. I don't need, to have a steak dinner at a steak restaurant 5 nights a week. I don't need to have a new car every year. But if there's some training that could help our team, I mean, a lot of that pays off. I mean, so many dividends for so long.
Exactly.
I will say, like, your type of system, that phone experience, those are things your employees will take with them. And
Mhm.
I met a former receptionist. She's now a dental hygienist, and she said, I can't. She was talking to Ashley. She's like, you guys ruined me. Like, I can't call most companies. I can't call, like, their phones are so bad. Like, yeah, I think you'll know you're getting it right. I love your thought on that. Like, I bet people that have been trained by you, like, find it hard to talk to the average restaurant to place an order, right?
They do. I always tell them at their first coaching session, I'm going to infect you and Amy on the brain. And they're like, it is. It's like you open their eyes to what's around them and how different it can sound and how different it can feel. And that's the cool thing.
Yeah.
And then they carry this into their personal lives, and it's wonderful.
And they start to notice it. They start to notice that at Chick-fil-A, they say, it's my pleasure, which they learn from the Four Seasons, and those sorts of things. They start to pick up their radars on, and they hear cool things that other companies are doing. Oh, that was a really smart way to say that, right? Instead
Right.
of saying we don't have any tables, we say we are fully committed. Like that's clever, right?
Mhm.
It's still the same answer. Like, you aren't getting a table tonight, but we are fully committed, and you
Yes.
you may try to find a seat at the bar. Let me see. So it's an interesting thing that happens when you train your team, is that they start to notice other good things. It's like LeBron James kind of notices everything going on a basketball court. Your team at that level of expertise starts to be more aware of customer service and scripting. It's really, really
Well,
cool.
and it's like, you talked about sports. How many reels do they watch of their game? That's the other important thing. The mistake is thinking that simply by gaining the knowledge that you actually have the habit. So you've got to have that feedback loop.
Yeah, when you dive in and start helping a team, and you said you're listening to at least an hour's worth of calls for each person before each training. What's it like for the employee? Are they listening to calls? Can you walk us through that process a little bit?
Again, it goes back to your phone system. Some phone systems are easy for that person to go back and listen to themselves, and some will. What I do for them is if they can't access it very well, I say, if you have a really challenging or a really wonderful call, email me right away. I will make sure I go find that because I take a sample set and we'll dive in on it. So a lot of times somebody will have a challenging phone call and we almost do a post-mortem on it, and that's usually where they learn the most because there's these tipping things that, oh my goodness, we could have turned it up. Oh, it just keeps going down because you're justifying yourself, and a lot of times those are the game changers that all of a sudden they go, "Hmm, all right, got it,
Yeah,
this
it's point. It's using the objective of our standard, and I share this story a lot because she's a great member, longtime member of ours, and she started. We finally turned on the phone system, and she's listening to phone calls. And I said, do not, if you get a bad call, do not call that employee on the weekend. And she goes, what were you doing? What were you thinking? And so I got an email like Monday morning. This was years ago. She's like, I know you told me not to do it. She's like, but but I couldn't help myself because the doctor will hear the call, and you're
Well,
going, oh, I can't believe they said that. My worst ever. A phones coordinator, a patient called and said, "You guys do orthodontics in the Raymore location?" He said, "I don't know. I'll have to call you back." He was so busy and so frazzled. He's like, "I don't know. I'll have to call you back." Click. And at that time, we were doing ortho in all the locations. We were only doing pedo in a couple of them. And so I thought, you can at least like no training was going on in that time in that department. But she said you were so right, because the employee feels, if you had I called that employee and said, dude, what? I mean, come on, what was going on here? It just pulls the rug out from underneath them, and they don't feel supported. So I love that you give them the option to kind of like self-identify, because we're all our own worst critics, right? Like if I show you a picture of us, you'll be like, oh, I like your sweater. And I'm going like, man, I've lost a lot of hair up here. Like we're all really critical of ourselves. So anytime I listen to the phones, even, or I watched a Secret Shopper tape when I was the doc in the new patient room, I was most critical of me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't think the doc needs to call the phones coordinator on Saturday night and go, we need to talk about what's going on the phones. So,
and the pit in the stomach all weekend on there. Yeah.
Yeah, we can make Amy the bad guy, right?
Well,
But,
I think I told you my story of, let me be your Aunt Amy for your
yes.
practice. Because, sometimes hearing it from somebody on the outside is so much easier. And I have a nephew, he's now 13, but when he was 8, he has prune belly syndrome. So he doesn't have fine motor skills as well. And so when he had to learn to tie his shoes, he and his mom were going at it like this. And he's like, Mom, Aunt Amy will show me when we go to Mama's house, my mom's house. I sit with him, sit behind him, and in 5 minutes, he has tied his shoes. And he hikes up his pant legs, and he's like, I did it. And he turns to his mom and says, why couldn't you do that? My sister was like, that's wonderful, Tyson. But here's the thing. I didn't do anything differently that she has not done. But hearing it from an outside source that's not emotionally embedded in there can come across differently. And if our goal is to help them win, who cares which way it comes about?
Yep. Something magic happens when it's like the doctor or the office manager be like, we have said the same thing 800 times. And, here comes one of our team trainers or you, and they're like, oh yeah, this is a great, they're taking notes. And they're like, we've said this a million times.
I think the TV commercials with the TV dad on there, isn't that guy right now? TV dad says, and it's like,
oh, I love you. He's like, you're the best. Yeah, it's that's just something weird that happens, right? An outside expert comes in. Oh, clearly this is important. We're happy to be those people for those listening. I know we're getting close to the end of our time together. How can people find more about you? I know you speak a lot. You're at a lot of events. You're on the road. Where can people find you next? And what link can we send them to learn more about you?
Thank you. I will be at AAO, and I will be speaking there this year. My website is communicateexcellence.com. Email is amy@communicateexcellence.com. And if you're wanting to get your dipping your toe to how I do things, I do have a book, Communicate Excellence, that you can get on Amazon or Audible, or I have a YouTube channel as well that you can start to get. You can hear my cadence, you can hear how I speak, how I teach, and see if that's a fit for you.
Cool. Awesome. Some of my favorite coaches are all Toastmaster experts, whatever that level is. Charlie Martin was one of those years ago. Great dentist. So you're just like, there's just something magical about using words the right way. And I love it. So thank you for doing this. It's such an honor. This is so valuable for me and for our members. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Dustin. I really appreciate it. Have a wonderful day.
Yeah, you too.